will say is I just find it incredibly tiresome that there's this absolute pylon, and it is not about what she said. It's about who she is, because most of the people who are making the criticism, they don't really, they're not surprised by what she said, but they object to it because of the sort of woman she is. And a woman of her background is not supposed to have these views. And that, to me, is still putting us back in the box in which, because we've got dark skin, we're all supposed to have the same views. And other people have decided what those views are for us. And that's what irritates me about the reaction.
Suella Braverman and senior Conservative MPs have accused the Home Secretary of stoking hatred in her hardline speech on immigration. Chair of the Justice Committee, Sir Bob Neill, warned that her alarmist rhetoric would make it harder to solve the small boats crisis. In Washington yesterday, Braverman declared that multiculturalism has failed and threatens to unravel the fabric of British society.
Multiculturalism makes no demands of the incomer to integrate. It has failed because it allowed people to come to our society and live parallel lives in it. They could be in the society, but not of the society. And in extreme cases, they could pursue lives aimed at undermining the stability and threatening the security of our society.
Trevor, Phillips, you've had a lot to say on multiculturalism, haven't you? Causing a few headlines of your own in 2015 by calling it a racket exploited by some to entrench segregation. Suella Braverman says it's failed. I know recently you've said that there's a complacency about how our version of multiculturalism is working. What do you think now?
Pretty much what I thought for 20 years. We basically don't really. There's a sort of presumption in this country that as long as nobody's throwing Molotov cocktails in the street, everything's going to be all right, and we'll all be nice to each other and so on. Well, it's fine if what happens is that actually, as is true in most of this country, you live and amongst people who are pretty much like you, and who do the same things as you do and like the same things as you do. I don't think that's a recipe for a great diverse society. It's just a practical statistical fact. For the most part, people meet people of a different ethnicity at work, and then they go home and they spend their discretionary time, but by and large, except for particular groups, with other people like themselves. And I think that's what I've always talked about. But Suella Braverman's, I don't really agree with what she said yesterday. So, for example, I think she underestimates the idea that the economic and the objective circumstances that make people live separately. If you came and you worked in the textile mills, you lived next to people who are like you, so that's why we have Burnley and so on in the way it is. And when those mills closed, the people couldn't move. So it's not a big surprise that Pakistani Muslim people in those towns cluster together. But on the other hand, she also didn't mention that we have this extraordinary, miraculous, I say, million or so people of mixed race that has arisen in a way that's not true in any other country, developed country. And so I think she makes some mistakes about it. But what I will say is I just find it incredibly tiresome that there's this absolute pylon, and it is not about what she said. It's about who she is, because most of the people who are making the criticism, they don't really, they're not surprised by what she said, but they object to it because of the sort of woman she is. And a woman of her background is not supposed to have these views. And that, to me, is still putting us back in the box in which, because we've got dark skin, we're all supposed to have the same views, and other people have decided what those views are for us. And that's what irritates me about the reaction.
So it's effectively racist.
Yesterday.
People are being racist by saying, look at you. Look at the colour of your skin. Look at the fact you're descended from Goan Indians from Mauritius and Kenya. Look at the fact that you're married to a Jewish man. Look at the fact that the government's headed up by a British PM who's a practising Hindu. People are being racist by accusing her of questioning multiculturalism, despite all that.
As you know, Kate, I never use that word because it's generally so stupendously devalued, but that I just, saying people are racist has now become
Okay.
a sort of...
People are
I
prejudiced.
really have to come in on this.
Go on,
I really
please do.
have to come in on this. I so disagree with what Trevor's just said. It's not about her being brown skinned. It is about, if you've had this history and your parents were voluntary migrants, they were not facing any oppression, because I come from the same background, and your parents decided that when countries became independent, they didn't want to live under black rule, and they made the choice to come here, then you are expected to understand why other people move, some because they have to, and some because they want to, like her parents did. And secondly, Trevor and his brother wrote the most beautiful book, I think, of what life was like for the Windrush generation. It's a wonderful title, The Irresistible Rise of Multiracial Britain. And I think that's how I see it. And I'm glad Trevor's mentioned the mixed race. It's the fastest growing group of Britons in this country, but also it goes back to the 16th century. And what are we saying? We are such a failed multicultural society that not only do we have a prime minister, but we have Zadie Smith, we have Marcus Rashford, we have Trevor Phillips, we have Nadia Hussein.
But do those success stories mask? Do those
European countries? Ours has been a fantastic, good story about diversity.
Trevor,
can I make a couple of brief points? First of all, thank you for what you said about our book Windrush. But the truth is, Windrush is an origin story for people who are like me. And to be honest, even right now in Black Britain, that's not the origin story of most Black people, because the majority of Black people in this country now have come directly from Africa. Theirs is a completely different story. The people who came from East Africa, like you, also have a completely different story. And if I may just make a point about Suella Braverman, her father was one of 5 brothers. The other 4 left Kenya pretty much at the same time in the 60s as her father came here. And why did they come here? They came here because the Kenyans passed an act which allowed, literally it enshrined discrimination against Asians because they had to be registered. Their jobs were taken away and they couldn't do anything about it. You will know their businesses were burned down. So I think that
I was there, Trevor. Sorry, I was there.
Can I just finish what I'm saying?
Yeah, I was there. It's not true.
You weren't in Kenya. Can I just make? Oh, so all those 27,000 Kenyan Asians who got on the plane,
they were the
arrived with nothing.
My family included. We were given the option
to
keep our British passports.
Can I just finish what I was going to say?
I don't think you should portray this history in the way you just have. It's not true.
Let's just finish with Trevor briefly, and then we'll come to you, Yasmin, so you can answer the points in full.
Look, my point is very simple. You may say it wasn't like that. All I can tell you, as you know that, Yasmin, I've made dozens of films about this. So all of those Kenyan nations, all of the people who told me that were lying. Come on, give me a break. The point is, you may disagree with her, as I do. But what I don't think is right is to attack her because you think that because she's got this background, she ought to be saying something different. Somebody on a different radio station last night who was born in Cambridge, brought up in Essex, lectured her about how she should have a better insight into migrant life. I mean, what the hell?
I don't know
I'm
who
fed
you're
up with
talking
white
about.
people constantly
No,
telling
I just want to.
people constantly telling us what we should
I want
think.
to actually address this thing.
Yeah,
the story of East African nations is a complicated one, and yes, some of it is a myth. Okay, when we left Uganda, and most of my family lived in Kenya, and of course there was resentment, and the resentment came because a lot of Asian businesses, I would say most of them, failed to bring in Africans into their business. Okay, there are loads of books, I can send you the titles, which now are telling that story. A lot of Asians never left. They're there.
I know
still.
that. I know that. I know that, but nobody. There's no law that says you must hire X or Y. I mean, I think this is just what you're
You
saying
live in
is
their country and you keep them
her
as
experience.
third-class citizens, which is what we did, and that's okay. And then you flee because they're going to be powerful. That's the story, Trevor, because I was there. And I've written about it too.
All right.
Okay.
Look, there is some fascinating insight on both sides, and we've, connected to but strayed a little from the point. I think it's, interesting that, both of you don't agree with Suella Braverman that multiculturalism has failed, and you have different reasons, clearly. I'm going to call time on that. It is a brilliant and fascinating debate to be had, and I'm really glad that both of you have joined us this evening to make that debate, to put those points forward as well. It is incredible insight.